So normally in these videos, I kind of try to keep a pretty tight ship. I try to keep the conversation pretty close to the poem, and even when I have videos in multiple playlists, and this one will be in the Dark Academia playlist as well as the regular poetry discussion playlist, I try to have a discussion that is walking the line between the specialty of the playlist and the actual poetry discussion in general playlist. So most of the videos in the Dark Academia playlist, there's discussion of the actual bit of the poem that is included, and there will be a little bit of that today. But what is going to be going on for the most part in this video, I think, is something which is more closely related to Dark Academia and Dark Academia as a lifestyle than it is the poem itself. But it is the poem that will be used as the jumping off point. Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, as I ramble on here at the beginning, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature eventually. And today's video will appear in two different playlists, number one being the poetry discussion playlist, number two being the Dark Academia playlist. And the poem in question today is known as Extreme Unction by Ernest Christopher Dowson. Dowson. And it reads as such. Upon the eyes, the lips, the feet, on all the passages of sense, the atoning oil is spread with sweet renewal of lost innocence. The feet that lately ran so fast to meet desire are soothly sealed. The eyes that were so often cast on vanity are touched and healed. From troublous sights and sounds set free, in such a twilight hour of breath, shall one retrace his life or see through shadows the true face of death? Vials of mercy, saccharin oils, I know not where nor when I come, nor through what wanderings and toils, to crave your viaticum. Yet, when the walls of flesh grow weak in such an hour, it well may be, through mist and darkness light will break, and each anointed sense will see. So, one of the interesting things about this poem is the way that the church has evolved on this idea of the unction, the extreme unction, the blessing here. In the early church, as I understand it, this was just a blessing. Blessing with oil was kind of just a thing that you could do. You would bless someone. By the time the Middle Ages came around, perhaps because of scarcity, I don't know, it became basically a final blessing. It became kind of like the last rites. However, the Second Vatican Council of the 1960s, the early 1960s, it reverted to something more broad. It was not as specific as something like the last rites. This poem, however, was published in 1893. So Dowson wrote this about the final rites type of extreme unction, of oil anointment with oil. Oil your anointment. And that's interesting in and of itself. Maybe there's something in there. There's also one small detail that would be interesting if you were writing a paper on this poem, if you were looking for an actual sort of straightforward interpretation. And that's this. When he's talking about the dead. So the poem is about anointing with oil the dead or sometimes the dying. But I think here it's the dead. The feet that lately ran so fast to meet desire are soothly sealed, rubbing oil on the feet. So I think that this is the death of a young person. So there's something in there to be said. Is there a dichotomy between the actual words on the page and the intent of the speaker? Is there some ironic interpretation between the two? Right? But what I want to talk about is the idea of death and this poem, the idea of death and last rites, the idea of last rites and dark academia. So this poem was written when the idea of this last rites type of anointment was more literal, was upon actual death. And it was meant sort of, if someone couldn't confess, this oil, this blessing was able to actually, at least in hopes, absolve that sin the way that a confession could. It was also hoped at times to perhaps heal. The oils themselves would be imbued with magical powers from the Almighty, etc. Sounds a bit like magic, though, doesn't it? But what I want to talk about is the idea that death is less literal. The way that it was in the early church, the way that it is post-1960s and the Second Vatican Council, right? We talk so much about the Second Vatican Council on this channel. I've talked a lot about dark academia as a symbolic death, as a death of the ego. I've talked a lot about dark academia as the leaving behind of what you were for what you can become. So if you were to do some type of last rites for, some type of blessing for, entering a dark academic phase, as it is a symbolic death. The same way that coming of age rituals, many societies have coming of age rituals. We don't really have many rituals in the United States at all, but you turn 16 in other places and they celebrate that, or 18, or 15, whatever the age is for the culture that you kind of become an adult. We don't really have that. And we certainly don't have that at large for something like dark academia. But if we did, if we had this ritual, so in those rituals, the coming of age ritual is the death of your childhood and the birth of your adulthood. This, dark academia, I think, is sort of death of the adulthood, rebirth into the individual, right? The individual is something different than the adult. The adult just means you're a certain age. The individual means that you know who it is that you are, and that, I think, is part of dark academia. In this way, would you, if you were anointing, if you were blessing, would you do that upon entering dark academia? Or would you do that upon the emergence from dark academia? If you were deciding to accept some type of blessing here, would it be ink, right? What would it be? What is it that you would do to differentiate yourself from the person that previously you had been? Is there some way to do an ink on your forehead, right? Bathing in pulp water, something like that. I don't know. I think it's an interesting idea. I think that oftentimes, especially in the United States, I think that oftentimes, especially in the modern day, we just kind of dispel these ideas of ritual. We've gotten rid of them. We don't do anything with it anymore. One of the strange things that has emerged in the since like 2020. Many people used to have the ritual of going to the movies. Not anymore. The box office, I've looked at this. The box office here in 2025 is at the same level that it was around 2007. So it's basically taken 20 years off of the growth of the box office in the past couple of years. One of the contributing factors to that is that people have simply gotten out of the ritual of seeing the latest movie. Even that, perhaps the most American of rituals, going to the movie theater, even that, it seems, is done in our society. So if you were to accept some dark academic type of ritual, what would that be? Some type of blessing, what would that be? That is all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. There's poetry every Monday, and as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.